Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy today's episode.
When Princess Yuling heard this, regret and disappointment appeared in her eyes. But if your highness can provide some god-tier materials to make the galaxy, it's not like our blazing sun kingdom can't make one or two galaxy for the Night Empire. Zhou Zhou smiled. Really? Can you show me the god-tier materials that your country needs? Zhou Zhou nodded and asked Wenya to send him the corresponding information. Soon, a personal terminal was sent over by a spaceship robot and handed to Yuling. After familiarizing herself with the operation of her personal terminal, she looked at the god-tier materials needed to build Galaxy. After watching for a while, Yuling frowned slightly. Then, she looked up at Zhou Zhou. I need to go back and discuss this with King Father, she said seriously. Of course. Zhou Zhou smiled. The god-tier materials that Yuling had seen had already been doubled by Wenya under his secret instructions, which meant, if Wenya really followed the instructions and sent over all the god-tier materials needed to build the Galaxy spaceships, Wenya could use these god-tier materials to build 2 more Galaxy spaceships. Other than that, he also had to pay the manufacturing fee of 100 low-tier deity-level intermediate-grade divine crystals. However, Zhou Zhou did not feel burdened by this. This was how technology monopolies worked. Nothing was for free. Friendship was friendship, and business was business. He could still distinguish such a small matter. Moreover, he would have taken advantage of the situation at this time, if not for the fact that they were both humans. If it were other people of foreign races, he would have given the estimate of 5 Galaxy spaceships materials to build 2 Galaxy spaceships. He would also have increased the manufacturing costs significantly. In addition, he felt that Yuling already felt that the requirements for this god-tier material were a little too much. However, she seemed to have seen through it and did not say anything. In Zhou Zhou's eyes, this was exactly what smart people did. After a while, Zhou Zhou and company used the spatial teleportation array and arrived at a legendary tier advanced grade spatial teleportation array where Bai Yun and company were. Then, Zhou Zhou met Bai Yun and company. Greetings, Your Majesty. Bai Yun and the other generals and lords of the Star Alliance said respectfully. How's it going? Zhou Zhou asked. We just captured 2 legendary tier advanced grade spatial teleportation arrays, 3 epic tier advanced grade spatial teleportation arrays, and 3 extraordinary tier advanced grade spatial teleportation arrays. Currently, all the extraordinary tier advanced grade spatial teleportation arrays have been captured by us. On the way to the Divine Sword Empire, there are only 6 legendary tier and 11 epic tier advanced teleportation arrays left. We should be able to occupy all of them before tonight. Zhou Zhou could not help but ponder. Before he came, he had wanted to bring Bai Yun and the others to the Divine Sword Empire. Now that he heard what the other party said, he suddenly wanted the other party to occupy all the spatial teleportation arrays first. Even if he and Yuling went to the Divine Sword Empire in advance and told the Night Empire that they needed the support of the Divine Sword Empire, the other party would probably need him to open all the spatial teleportation arrays first so that they could teleport troops to support each other. At the thought of this, Zhou Zhou decided not to bring Bai Yun along so that they did not have to waste time detouring. He had the Galaxy spaceship in his hands and the high-tier deity-level intermediate-grade puppet, the Pillar of the Empire. On this trip to the Divine Sword Empire, even if he encountered any enemies along the way, it would not be a problem for him to fight or escape. It was fine if he did not bring Bai Yun and the rest along. Sure. Continue to occupy the remaining spatial teleportation arrays. When you reach the Divine Sword Empire, inform me through the Blood Bat avatar. I'll go to the Divine Sword Empire in advance to greet them. Zhou Zhou said. Yes, Your Majesty. Bai Yun was stunned for a moment before replying respectfully. Zhou Zhou nodded and flew back to the galaxy with Yuling. If I didn't know that your kingdom was newly built, I find it hard to imagine that you are a beginner kingdom that has just been established a few days ago. Yuling sighed. She saw the 3 god spirits Qi Xintian, Guo Qiao, and Zaiwu other than Bai Yun just now. What surprised her was, she could actually feel the threat of a mid-tier deity level or even higher from these 3 god spirits. It did not give her the feeling of a lesser god spirit at all. She naturally knew what this meant. This represented the three god spirits. Other than the Snow Wolf mid-tier deity level god spirit, the other sword cultivator, and the low-tier deity level god spirit who used the axe both had combat power comparable to a mid-tier deity level god spirit or even higher. Yu Ling was extremely talented in perception. Therefore, she did not suspect that her perception was wrong. Then, she thought of the god spirits that Wu Xian had seen previously. There was only one thought in Yu Ling's mind. The king of the Blazing Sun's beginner kingdom was a little ridiculous. On the other side, after hearing Yu Ling's words, Zhou Zhou smiled and said nothing. In the time that followed, the two of them chatted on the spaceship while waiting to reach the Divine Sword Empire. The atmosphere was quite friendly. By the way, what river is the galaxy? Is it the river of your Blazing Sun Kingdom? Yu Ling asked curiously. The galaxy is my hometown, Zhou Zhou said. Yu Ling immediately understood. The hometown here should refer to the hometown of the human race on the cerulean planet behind Zhou Zhou. Zhou Zhou was also thinking about Galaxy's name. He had asked Wenya privately about the origins of the name Galaxy. In the end, Wenya said, among the many spaceship models of the Machina race, there was no spaceship model named Milky Way. And most importantly, the galaxy name on the galaxy was written in Chinese on Earth. The galaxy was personally created by the Master God Tier, and the Master God Tier wrote Galaxy's name in Chinese. I'm afraid that in the eyes of that Master God Tier, my identity as a transmigrator can be seen at a glance by he. It's not a secret at all. Zhou Zhou's mind was wandering. Perhaps transmigrators in this world were not rare species at all. Perhaps there was another one somewhere, or even many transmigrators who were working hard to increase their strength and power. To those high and mighty Master God Tier, even though transmigrators were a little special, they were probably just SOSO. He shook his head inwardly and stopped thinking about it. 20 minutes later, we're already approaching the territory of the Divine Sword Empire. When Ya's voice rang in Zhou Zhou and Linger's ears. Activating virtual outdoor mode. Zhou Zhou said. The next second, the bulkhead around Zhou Zhou and Yu Ling suddenly became transparent, revealing the scene outside. The two of them only took a glance before Zhou Zhou frowned, and Yu Ling's expression turned ugly. On the ground, a vast number of fog monsters covered the ground. They were like waves as they continuously attacked a city wall that was nearly 10,000 meters tall. They were like tempestuous waves on the sea, vowing to break the city wall that was blocking them. Inside the city wall was a huge military fortress stained with blood. Groups of soldiers continuously transported supplies to the city wall. Sword cultivators in all kinds of clothes were either riding flying swords to defend the city wall or rushing out of the protection of the city wall. They rode the vast sword chi and fought a bloody battle with the fog monster. In the sky were a large number of flying fog monsters that constantly flew towards the city wall, wanting to fly over the city wall to kill the human soldiers and subjects inside. However, just as they reached the sky above the city wall, they collided with a transparent membrane that covered the entire military fortress. Streaks of sword chi crisscrossed on the transparent membrane, forming an inseparable network of sword chi that blocked the flying fog monsters. A large number of sword cultivators would rush out and repair the sword chi network while fighting these fog monsters. Every second, a large number of fog monsters and human sword cultivators died on the battlefield. The scene was very tragic. There are about 50 million fog monsters. Zhou Zhou glanced at the monster data displayed by Wenya and knew the approximate number of these fog monsters. This is the Diamond Tier regional territory located in the border area of the Divine Sword Empire, 9-Net City. There are about 35 such military fortresses in the Divine Sword Empire. Just a military fortress was attacked by so many fog monsters. The current situation of the Divine Sword Empire. Yu Ling bit her lip, her face pale. She had come here on the galaxy to ask the Divine Sword Empire to help their Night Empire tide over the crisis. From the looks of it, the situation of the Divine Sword Empire seemed to be even worse than their Night Empire. She had a faint premonition that the journey to seek help would not be as smooth as she had imagined. Perhaps the Divine Sword Empire actually needed their help. At this moment, Zhou Zhou and Yuling suddenly realized that the situation below seemed to have changed. 9 Net City. The southeast of the 10 Directions Heavenly Net Sword Formation has been damaged. Formation Repair Team number 211 will be covered by Elite Swordsman Team number 1156. Heavenly Cloud Cannon number 566 is overheating. Assistant Gunner, come over and cast a spell to cool down. My flying sword is broken. Give me another flying sword. The second front lacks demon-subduing talismans. Hurry up and send a batch of reinforcements over. Someone save my brother. The sounds of soldiers fighting, weapons clashing, spells colliding, city walls bombarding, and war machines operating resounded inside and outside the city walls. On the tallest city wall, a middle-aged general in silver armor looked at the battlefield solemnly. His name was Sun Wujie. He was the city lord of 9 Net City and the strongest person in 9 Net City. 2 more days. We have to transfer all the remaining subjects of 9 Net City to the inland city within these 2 days. This way, we can fight in peace or die. These bastards from the Qilin Dragon Scarlet Empire. If these guys hadn't sealed the surrounding space, we wouldn't have been so passive and couldn't even fight happily. When he thought of this, his expression became gloomy. When the Qilin Dragon Scarlet Army attacked their 9 Net City, they specially used some kind of spatial sealing device to seal off all the space around 9 Net City, causing the subjects who instinctively teleported through the spatial teleportation array to be unable to move. Their soldiers could not leave this place, and the reinforcements from the outside world could not come to their 9 Net City. Their 9 Net City had already become an isolated island. Under such circumstances, the other party could attack without any scruples. However, they did not dare to fight back in full force because they had to be wary of the subjects in the city. They could only rely on the array formation to defend. As the saying went, one would lose if one defended for a long time. Sun Wujie knew that this couldn't go on. However, he really had no other choice. At this moment, rumble. A huge explosion occurred in the sky. Sun Wujie suddenly looked up and was shocked by the scene he saw. In the sky, the 10 Directions Heavenly Net Sword Formation, which was responsible for blocking the flying fog monsters, had a huge hole of more than 100 meters. A large number of fog monsters roared and swarmed towards the huge hole. A small number of fog monsters had already rushed into the array and started fighting with the sword cultivators in the city. A minute. Sun Wujie didn't have time to think about why the 10 Directions Heavenly Net Sword Formation, which had never had any problems, was giving problems. His body suddenly erupted with the pressure of a low-tier deity-level god spirit, and then he shot towards the 10 Directions Heavenly Net Formation. But just as he was flying halfway, a scarlet god spirit with the head of a black Qilin and the body of a giant western dragon, exuding a mid-tier deity-level aura, suddenly appeared in front of him. You must be the Guardian General of 9 Net City, Sun Wujie. You have already shown your outstanding talent to be able to resist until now. Now, 9 Net City is about to be breached. Give up resisting. I can make the decision to transform a top-grade Scarlet Divine Body for a talent like you. How about that? His voice rumbled as he looked at Sun Wujie in admiration. In the Divine Sword Empire, there are only sword cultivators who die standing. There are no traitors who live on their knees. Die! Sun Wujie's eyes were bloodshot. He summoned his life-bound flying sword and slashed at his opponent. Hmph! I'm giving you face, but you don't want it. The Qilin dragon stretched out its black dragon claws and grabbed the flying sword that Sun Wujie had slashed at him with all his might. Then, he opened his mouth and bit at Sun Wujie. At the same time, he manifested a huge Qilin dragon head that looked like a heavenly phenomenon and bit at him. My life is over. Sun Wujie knew that he wouldn't be able to block or escape from this gigantic Qilin dragon Dharmalaksana. The only regret in his heart was that he did not manage to relocate the remaining subjects in 9 Net City. 9 Net City would probably be breached soon once he died. At that time, the remaining 9 Net City subjects would probably die at the hands of these fog monsters. He was filled with self-blame. But at this moment, a figure in the Emperor Dragon robe suddenly appeared in front of him. He held the golden divine sword in his hand and waved it. Thousands of golden sword chi filled with spirituality shot out from the golden sword. In the blink of an eye, it covered an area of more than 10 square kilometers, covering this space like a sword domain. Then, Zhou Zhou willed and thousands of golden sword chi instantly formed a huge golden sword that was more than 10,000 meters long. It was the sword Dao phenomenon formed by the myriad sword immortal formation. Go! He pointed at the Qilin dragon Dharmalaksana and saw the golden sword suddenly change direction and slash at it. Rumble. The two collided, resulting in a shocking explosion. Before the tens of thousands of fog monsters nearby could react, they were affected by the explosion. In the blink of an eye, not even powder was left. The swordsmen nearby were not injured. Under Zhou Zhou's protection, they were just in a sorry state. Sword Chi Thread Realm. Sun Wujia's eyes lit up when he saw this. He looked at Zhou Zhou with a strange gaze. Only such a supreme realm of the sword Dao could control such a terrifying power so easily without injuring the sword cultivators on his side. Then, Sun Wujia and the Scarlet God Spirit of the Qilin Dragon race seemed to have discovered something on Zhou Zhou, and their eyes widened. Epic tier? An epic tier human can actually withstand my Qilin Dragon's bite? The Qilin Dragon race's Scarlet God Spirit had an incredulous expression. Then, he looked at Zhou Zhou, his expression gradually turning ruthless and resolute. Today, I must kill you even if we can't take down Nine Net City. Otherwise, you will definitely become a huge threat to my master in the future, he said in a low voice. Zhou Zhou acted as if he didn't hear what he said. He took out the pillar of the Empire puppet and materialized it to protect himself. Kill him, Zhou Zhou said coldly.
Yes.
The pillar of the Empire, Gerard, looked at the dazed Qilin Dragon God Spirit and grinned hideously. Then, he charged forward with the space-splitting blade in hand. Zhou Zhou turned to look at Sun Wujia when he saw Gerard fighting with the other party. Sun Wujia also looked at him with burning eyes. Are you reinforcements sent by His Majesty? He asked expectantly. No, I'm from the Blazing Sun Kingdom. The Night Empire invited me over. I have something to discuss with your country on this trip. Zhou Zhou shook his head. The Blazing Sun Kingdom. When Sun Wujia heard that they were not reinforcements, he was a little disappointed at first. Then, when he heard the words Blazing Sun Kingdom, his eyes revealed a confused expression. Why does this name sound so familiar? Wait, you're that king of the Blazing Sun? King of the Blazing Sun, the light of hope of the human race who obtained the title of strongest lord of all races on the battlefield of the lords of all races? He suddenly widened his eyes and looked at Zhou Zhou. The corners of Zhou Zhou's mouth twitched. The title of strongest lord of all races is real, but what is this about the light of hope of the human race? He realized that there were more and more nicknames given to him recently. I can't take on such a heavy responsibility as the light of hope for the human race. However, I'm indeed the one who obtained the title of strongest lord of all races. Zhou Zhou said. As soon as he finished speaking, he realized that Sun Wujia was looking at him like he was looking at a giant panda. Then, he suddenly thought of something and his expression suddenly became anxious. Why are you here? Leave quickly. If those Scarlet Empire know that you're here, they'll definitely kill you at all costs. I was entrusted by someone, so I have to fulfill my mission. Zhou Zhou was not flustered. He smiled and said, and at present, as long as you and I don't expose my identity, very few people will know that I came here. Besides, I'm a lord of all races. My territory is clearly on the high continent. The supreme agreement aside, I have nowhere to run unless I give up my foundation if they really want to destroy me. Sun Wujia fell silent. It seemed to make sense. As a lord of all races, where could he run to? I won't reveal your identity. Sun Wujia raised his head and looked at Zhou Zhou seriously. Zhou Zhou nodded. He looked in Gerard's direction. At this moment, Gerard was relying on his high-tier deity-level intermediate grade strength to suppress the mid-tier deity-level elementary grade god spirit. Sun Wujia also saw this scene. He heaved a sigh of relief and was not as nervous as before. Then, he recalled his life-bound flying sword and charged towards the place where the 10 Directions heavenly net sword formation had been broken. When Zhou Zhou saw this, he charged forward with the sword of Xin Yuan in hand. The two of them quickly rushed to the place where the array had been broken through. Then, they joined forces to kill all the fog monsters that had rushed into the 10 Directions heavenly net sword formation. Then, they protected the array repair team and repaired all the damaged parts of the array before stopping. When the Qilin dragons, who were fighting Gerard in the distance, saw this scene, they were so angry that they wanted to vomit blood. He had deliberately disguised himself as a normal fog monster and approached the 10 Directions heavenly net sword formation. It was not easy for he to find a gap in the defense. Only then did he suddenly attack and break open a gap. Unexpectedly, it was repaired in the blink of an eye. He wanted to stop him. However, this high-tier deity-level Scarlet God spirit in front of him had been constantly dealing he fatal blows. This made he unable to escape at all. He didn't even dare to be distracted, afraid that if he was distracted, he would die here. Aren't you afraid that my lord will punish you for helping the supreme will? The Scarlet God spirit of the Qilin dragon race waited for Gerard to shout. As a puppet creature, Gerard could not be bothered to speak at all. The space-splitting blade slashed down continuously, making him deeply feel what a life and death crisis was. Soon, despair appeared on the face of the Qilin dragon race's Scarlet God spirit. He was only a mid-tier deity level. Even if he was talented, it was not enough for him to cross the gap between him and a high-tier deity level. He could feel it. He would die the moment the divine power in his body was exhausted. A sudden regret flooded over him for coming over to interfere in this matter. On the battlefield, thank you for your help. Sun Wujia looked at the handsome man in front of him with shining eyes. Even though this person was only at the epic tier advanced grade, his true combat strength far exceeded his. As expected of a man who repelled a full-strength attack from a mid-tier deity-level Scarlet God spirit with a single strike, Zhou Zhou waved his hand, indicating that he did not have to care. At this moment, he was also very satisfied with his current combat strength. He could have killed low-tier deity-level enemies at the epic tier with the Chaos human bloodline and the power of his divine artifacts. If his bloodline and divine artifact gave him the advantage of having enough force, then the Sword Dao inheritance he obtained this morning from Qi Xintian suddenly gave him an extremely high advantage in terms of skills. Force and skill combined. This allowed his true combat strength to break through again. He could fight enemies at the mid-tier deity level when he was at the epic tier. Such a glorious battle record. Even a prodigy like Qi Xintian could not compare. Qi Xintian had only used his epic tier advanced grade strength to kill low-tier deity level elementary grade enemies back then after all. While he had killed low-tier deity level elementary grade enemies when he was below the epic tier. Now that he had attained epic tier advanced grade, he could even face a mid-tier deity level Scarlet God spirit without being at a disadvantage. When I reach the legendary tier and can begin to use the sword of new dimension creation, I should be able to kill mid-tier deity level enemies. Moreover, I should have a certain level of ability to protect myself against high-tier deity level enemies. Zhou Zhou thought to himself. At that time, as long as a true god tier did not appear, he was basically not afraid of any enemies and should be able to speed up his development. He did not have to be too restricted like before. At this moment, the war was still on. Sun Wujie did not say anything else. He threw himself into the battlefield again and killed the powerful scarlet monsters to help the sword cultivators and soldiers ease the pressure of the battle. Zhou Zhou flew into the sky and raised his right hand. Then, he willed. Extraordinary tier Lord Talent, Insight Defection. Activate. The next second, an invisible fluctuation instantly covered the more than 50 million scarlet fog monsters. A text notification appeared. Prompt. You have activated your Lord exclusive talent, Insight Defection. Insight Defection has taken effect. Lord Talent notification. A total of 5,125,745 black iron tier fog monsters, 4,351,571 green bronze tier fog monsters, 2,139,965 white silver tier fog monsters, 1,021,571 yellow gold tier fog monsters, 516,652 white platinum tier fog monsters, 125,511 diamond tier fog monsters, 37,756 extraordinary tier fog monsters, 3,120 epic tier fog monsters. 52 legendary tier fog monsters have betrayed their lord's faction and become your loyal subordinates. Zhou Zhou nodded. Even though he had only insight defection captured 13,321,943 fog monsters, it was not as many as the 27 million fog monsters he had captured yesterday. It was already quite good. I still have one chance at insight defection chance. Perhaps I can use it on the fog monster army around the Divine Sword Empire. Zhou Zhou thought. Now that there were so many fog monsters besieging the Holy Sword Empire, it would be a waste of resources not to use them for insight defection. He did not think too much about it. He summoned the galaxy and gathered all the fog monsters that he had insight defection on. Then, before the fog monsters could react, he put them all into the galaxy. At this moment, the remaining fog monsters had first lost the deterrence of the Qilin dragon race's Scarlet God Spirit, and now they had lost 1/5 of their troops. At this moment, their threat to Nine Net City immediately decreased greatly, and they had even begun to be unable to suppress the attacks of the soldiers of Nine Net City. Sun Wujie seized the opportunity and immediately called for the soldiers of Nine Net City to counterattack the Scarlet Army. As for him, he rushed directly to the place where the Crimson God Spirit of the Qilin dragon race was fighting and dealt with the Scarlet God Spirit with Gerard. Under the situation where the two God Spirits were dealing with the Scarlet God Spirit of the Qilin dragon race together, he, who was already in a precarious situation, could no longer resist. Not long after, his head was cut off by Gerard, who reacted extremely quickly. With the death of the Qilin dragon God Spirit, the morale of the remaining Scarlet Legion soldiers plummeted. Less than an hour later, the remaining Scarlet Legion soldiers either died or fled. The victory completely belonged to Nine Net City. Sun Wujie and the other soldiers looked at the battlefield that had returned to calmness. Only the blood river and corpses were left. They were in a daze. We really won? A general with a broken arm said in disbelief. Yes, not only did we win, we also defeated the attacking Scarlet Legion. In a short period of time. There shouldn't be any enemies of the same level coming. Our Nine Net City is safe. We protected this territory for His Majesty and protected the subjects behind us. A smile appeared on Sun Wujie's face. When the generals heard this, they laughed excitedly. However, when they saw the corpses of the human soldiers and sword cultivators on the battlefield, their laughter gradually stopped and finally fell silent. Clean up the battlefield, collect the remains of the martyrs, and do the post-war appeasement work. After a long silence, Sun Wujie gave out orders one after another. Yes, General. After some people heard the order, they went to work. After he had arranged everything, he came in front of Zhou Zhou and suddenly wanted to kneel on one knee. However, Zhou Zhou reacted quickly and stopped him. If you hadn't saved us, all the soldiers and subjects of Nine Net City would have died here. In the future, if you need anything at all, you can come and ask this old sun for help. I, Sun Wujie, swear to my life-bound flying sword that I will definitely repay your kindness. Sun Wujie insisted on kneeling. However, Zhou Zhou was also very insistent. He did not want this hero to kneel down to him. We're both humans and don't have any aggro. Isn't it normal for us to support each other? If you really want to repay me, just pull me along if I'm in trouble in the future. Zhou Zhou said. He did not think that he was a victorious general, nor did he think that he would never be defeated. Hence, he meant what he said. Okay. Sun Wujie looked at Zhou Zhou's serious expression and finally nodded heavily. At this moment, a figure ran over from not far away. It was Princess Yuling. She held a sword in her hand, and her body was stained with blood. Her face was a little pale, but she looked quite excited. Soon, she arrived in front of Zhou Zhou. As expected of you, you actually saved Nine Net City the moment you attacked. Her eyes lit up as she looked at Zhou Zhou. Just doing what I can, Zhou Zhou said. And this is? Sun Wujia looked at Yuling. I'm the princess of the Night Empire. General Sun, you can call me Princess Yuling or Princess Alina. So it's the princess of the Night Empire. Sun Wujia looked at Princess Yuling, and his expression instantly became friendly and gentle. The five empires of the human race were on the same side and had a rather good relationship. In fact, the rulers of the five empires were sworn brothers. Therefore, Sun Wujia had a very good impression of Princess Yuling. Are you hurt? Zhou Zhou looked at Yuling and asked. When he came down from the galaxy, Yuling also came down. However, he had directly come to save Sun Wujia. Yuling knew that she could not play a role on the god's spirit-level battlefield and might even become a burden. Therefore, she did not come over together. Instead, she flew directly to the city wall and fought the fog monster with the soldiers and sword cultivators on the city wall. They're just some little monsters that haven't reached the god spirit level. They're not a threat to me. Yuling raised her head proudly. It was just that her face was covered with ashes. Zhou Zhou silently handed her a mirror, allowing her to see herself in the mirror. When Yuling saw this, her face immediately turned red. Then, she hurriedly used a cleaning spell to clean herself up. When Zhou Zhou and Sun Wujia saw this, they could not help but smile. Princess Yuling and I are here on behalf of the Night Empire to seek an audience with His Majesty. I wonder if you can introduce us? Zhou Zhou turned around and told Sun Wujia his business. Of course. Sun Wujia agreed without hesitation. The spatial teleportation array can be activated again after we remove the spatial seal around here. I'll send someone to take you to Fuyo Imperial Capital. As for me, I still need to stay here and guard the place. I won't accompany you guys. Sun Wujia said. Zhou Zhou and Yuling nodded. A moment later, a soldier came over to inform the three of them that they had found the enemy treasure that sealed the space. Now that the spatial seal had been lifted, the spatial teleportation array could be used normally. When Sun Wujia heard this, he found a general who was familiar with the Fuyo Imperial Capital and asked him to bring Zhou Zhou and Yuling to the spatial teleportation array to meet His Majesty. After bidding farewell to Yuling, Zhou Zhou followed the general into the spatial teleportation array and disappeared. Fuyo Imperial Capital. When Zhou Zhou arrived, the first thing he saw was a statue. The statue was 82,000 feet tall and looked like a handsome young man. He was dressed in Taoist robes and had a Huayang scarf on his head. He carried a horsetail whisk in his arms and carried a sword on his back. Even though he had a smile on his face, his eyes were filled with sharp sword chi. That's the founding sword immortal of the Divine Sword Empire, Fuyo Sword Emperor Liu Yan. He's also the Zenith Heaven Golden Immortal Realm ancestor behind the Divine Sword Empire. Yuling looked at the statue and explained to Zhou Zhou. Zhou Zhou nodded and was stunned. Liu Yan? Wait. Fuyo. Liu Yan. Sword Immortal. Does this old ancestor have another name, Liu Dongbin? Zhou Zhou asked softly. That's right. So you know about it too. It's said that when Patriarch Liu went out to cultivate, he once cultivated in a simple cave. He claimed to be a guest in the cave, so he got the title of Liu Dongbin. This almighty has many myths and legends that have spread throughout the myriad worlds. If you want to understand them, I can tell you. Yuling said confidently. It seemed like he admired Patriarch Liu very much. Zhou Zhou was a little confused. This feeling of the myths and legends of Earth suddenly appearing in front of him made him feel that it was unrealistic. It took him a long time to come back to his senses. It turned out that the legends of Patriarch Liu had already spread throughout the myriad worlds. It seemed that the Earth and Cerulean planet before I transmigrated were the two worlds affected. Yes, since there were Qi practitioners and the immortal world in this world, then what was so strange about the appearance of Patriarch Liu? Perhaps he would encounter Neza, Sun Wukong, or even existences at the three pure ones level in the future. Zhou Zhou thought. Following that, The two of them arrived at the Fuyo imperial capital's imperial palace under the lead of the general who led the way. After passing the message, the two of them successfully met the emperor of the Divine Sword Empire. The emperor of the Holy Sword Empire was a white-haired young man in a white imperial robe. He had a handsome face, jade-like skin, and bright eyes. He sat on the throne like a divine sword. A faint high-tier deity-level pressure emanated from him. The surrounding civil and military officials lowered their heads respectfully. There was no movement in the hall. Zhou Zhou / Yuling greets your majesty. Zhou Zhou and Yuling said respectfully. Zhou Zhou clicked his tongue as he did not expect the emperor of the Divine Sword Empire to be a top-notch high-tier deity-level expert. Rise, Emperor Lu Zhen said. His voice was steady and powerful. The two of them stood up when they heard this. Lu Zhen looked at the two of them. His gaze lingered on Zhou Zhou for a while before looking at Yuling. Niece Yuling, long time no see. How's your king father? He suddenly smiled. King father has been doing very well recently. It's just that he often talks about you every day. He says that he's been plagued by national affairs in recent years and hasn't competed with you in a long time. Yuling smiled. Lu Zhen laughed out loud and said with a sigh, It's been 132 years since I last competed with Brother Ji. I must carry my sword and meet Brother Ji after the calamity in front of me passes. King Father will definitely be very happy to hear this. Yuling nodded and smiled. Lu Zhen nodded and suddenly commented seriously. When I divined this morning, I already knew why you were here. Don't worry, the Night Empire is in trouble. As a friend of the same race, how can our Divine Sword Empire not lend a helping hand? Lu Zhen looked at Zhou Zhou. I will send troops to support the Night Empire after nephew connects all the spatial teleportation arrays between the two countries. He said solemnly. My subordinates should be able to open the teleportation array between the two countries tonight. Zhou Zhou said. Then I'll personally bring people to the Night Empire tomorrow. Lu Zhen said without hesitation. Zhou Zhou and Yuling looked at each other in confusion. The two of them felt that the current situation of the Divine Sword Empire did not seem to be very good. Why did His Majesty agree so readily? Could they have guessed wrongly? Could it be that the Divine Sword Empire could handle the fog monster army they were facing with ease? At this moment, Your Majesty, you can't. At this moment, an old official in a black robe stepped forward. Our Divine Sword Empire is currently surrounded by 6 Scarlet Empires. There are more than 3 billion Scarlet monsters protecting our empire. We really don't have the energy to support other countries now. The old minister persuaded earnestly. Then, he turned to look at Yuling and Zhou Zhou. Princess Yuling, King of the Blazing Sun, I'm really sorry. Under the current circumstances, our Divine Sword Empire really doesn't have the strength to send troops to help you. When the other ministers heard that someone was the first to speak, they also stepped forward to persuade Lu Zhen to retract his order. Sun Cheng, Zhou Han, Jiang Chun, you talk too much. This king has made up my mind. I will bring the 4th Pure Young Army to the Night Empire to provide support tomorrow. Our Divine Sword Empire is the leader of the 5 great empires. Now that our friends are in trouble, how can we not be an example? How many of our 5 human empires will be left after this calamity if we don't support each other? Lu Zhen looked at the ministers below resolutely. He had no intention of changing his mind. As the eldest brother of the 5 empires, he had to do this seeing that other empires were in trouble. Even if he had to withstand immense pressure, the old minister still wanted to say something. However, a majestic and vast sword intent erupted from Lu Zhen's body and covered the entire hall in the blink of an eye. At this moment, the other ministers were suppressed to the point of speechlessness apart from Zhou Zhou, who also released a majestic sword intent to resist Lu Zhen's sword intent. As for Yuling, she was not affected by Lu Zhen's sword intent deliberately. As such, Zhou Zhou became the most eye-catching person in the entire hall. All the ministers looked at Zhou Zhou in disbelief. They also felt the majestic sword intent on his body. It was hard for them to imagine how this young man could grasp such a shocking realm of the sword Dao at such a young age. Lu Zhen naturally noticed the difference in Zhou Zhou. He looked at Zhou Zhou with shining eyes. Then, he stood up and laughed out loud before looking at him with admiration. How rare! How rare! Judging from your age and the time you've spent, it's unbelievable that you can comprehend such a shocking sword intent in such a short period of time. Since ancient times, countless peerless sword cultivator geniuses have appeared in the human chi practitioner lineage. And among them, you are top of the list, Lu Zhen said with certainty. As soon as these words were spoken, all the ministers, including Yu Ling, who was beside Zhou Zhou, gasped slightly and looked at him in shock. Especially Yu Ling. She looked at Zhou Zhou with sparkling eyes. Even though she knew that Zhou Zhou's attainments in the Sword Dao were very high from his performance in Nine Net City, she did not expect that it could actually be so high. One had to know that His Majesty was the descendant of Sword Emperor Fuyo. His words were extremely valuable. Moreover, since the other party could say that Zhou Zhou's Sword Dao aptitude was ranked first since ancient times, it was very likely that the other party had included Sword Emperor Fuyo. Under such circumstances, he could still be ranked first. It was obvious that Lu Zhen approved of Zhou Zhou. Ahem. Zhou Zhou blushed slightly. His own people knew his situation. His Sword Dao cultivation and aptitude were only replicated from Qi Xintian. How could it be as exaggerated as what His Majesty said? Before today, he had not even focused on practicing sword techniques for a few days. He felt a little embarrassed to be praised like this. At the same time, Lu Zhen looked at the other ministers and suddenly snorted. A bunch of disappointing people. You're sword cultivators, but none of you are as strong as a rising star who has only mastered supernatural power for less than a month. The ministers smiled bitterly. I've already decided to support the Night Empire. There's no need for you to say anything. General Situ, I'll leave the reorganization of the troops to you. Lu Zhen said. The ministers looked at each other and shook their heads helplessly, but no one tried to persuade him anymore. Your Majesty, Yu Ling has something to say. At this moment, Yu Ling stood up and said, Oh, just tell me what you want to say. As Lu Zhen spoke, he was filled with the gentleness of an elder to a junior to Yu Ling. He did not have the airs of a ruler of the empire at all. Actually, even though our Night Empire has been attacked by the fog monster forces during this period of time, with the help of the King of the Blazing Sun, the general situation on the battlefield has eased a lot. It's just that we're still a little powerless on a God Spirit level battlefield, Yu Ling said. Really? When Lu Zhen heard that, he raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at Zhou Zhou. The other ministers also looked at Zhou Zhou in surprise. They did not know how Zhou Zhou, a lord of a race that had just risen, could help the Night Empire in a war of this level. For real. Yu Ling looked at Lu Zhen seriously. Interesting. It seems like this nephew didn't obtain the title of strongest lord of all races purely because of luck. Lu Zhen looked at Zhou Zhou in wonder. If that's the case, I'll bring some God Spirit level combat power to the Night Empire tomorrow. He changed his mind and said. The ministers heaved a sigh of relief. At this moment, Lu Zhen suddenly stood up. The eunuch behind him immediately understood and shouted, Leave the court. This court meeting would end. Then, Lu Zhen waved his hand and Zhou Zhou and Yu Ling disappeared before they could react. Imperial Palace. In the Imperial Garden, when Zhou Zhou and Yu Ling landed on the ground again, they realized that they had arrived in the blink of an eye. Lu Zhen was sitting on an exquisite table made of god-tier wood in front of them, drinking tea leisurely. My good niece, tell me the details. I'm very interested in how this nephew helped the Night Empire relieve the pressure. Lu Zhen looked at Zhou Zhou with interest. When Yu Ling heard this, she subconsciously looked at Zhou Zhou and saw him nod. When Yu Ling saw this, she told him the truth about Zhou Zhou sending hundreds of millions of troops to clean up the fog monster army near the Night Empire's territory. When he heard that Zhou Zhou might have more than 1 billion troops, even Lu Zhen could not help but gape at Zhou Zhou in shock. He could manage to garner 1 billion in troops if he added up all the forces in the Divine Sword Empire. Yet this nephew, who had just arrived in the High Continent, actually had more than 1 billion soldiers? Even if most of the 1 billion soldiers were new recruits, that was still impressive. Lu Zhen's first thought was disbelief. However, looking at the serious Yu Ling and the calm Zhou Zhou, Lu Zhen felt that this matter was very likely true. Tomorrow, I will lead some god spirits to the Night Empire. When the time comes, let me see how strong you are. Lu Zhen really wanted to see the strength of this strongest rising star of the human race. Zhou Zhou nodded without hesitation. Your Majesty, the Divine Sword Empire is surrounded by the Scarlet Fog Army. I've seen a lot along the way. Therefore, I'd like to be bold and contribute to the Divine Sword Empire. Even though it might not be of much use, I still hope to give it a try. I hope your Majesty can agree, Zhou Zhou said. You're too kind, nephew. Honestly, the situation of our Divine Sword Empire is actually not very good. We need help now. If nephew wants to help, we can't ask for more. How can I dictate what you do? I'll arrange a general for you later. Just inform him when you want to go there. He'll bring you there, Lu Zhen said. Thank you, your Majesty. Zhou Zhou smiled and nodded. Oh yes, since you're already here, and you said that the remaining spatial teleportation arrays can be opened tonight, the faction quest given to you by the Night Empire should be almost completed, right? When Lu Zhen reached the end, he looked at Yu Ling. Yu Ling was stunned for a moment before hurriedly nodding. Of course. As soon as she finished speaking, lines of text appeared in front of Zhou Zhou. System announcement. Faction quests. Distant Divine Sword Empire has been completed. Faction mission reward. 78.9 million faction points. Diplomatic relations between the Night Empire and the Divine Sword Empire have been upgraded to the level of respect. 1 Death Sword in the Death Sword Demonic Abyss. Not used. 10,000 Empire-level combat class. The loyalty of the Army Extermination Knight. 1,000 legendary tier mist cores have been distributed. When Zhou Zhou saw this line of words, he could not help but smile. He opened the Night Empire faction points ranking and Elven Empire faction points ranking. Both of them were still firmly occupying the first place with the advantage of absolute faction points. Then, he took a deep breath and opened the Lord Faction Points ranking with anticipation. Myriad Races Lord Faction Points ranking. First place, Original Spirit Race, True Lord, 332,600,000 faction points. Second place, Shepherd's God Race, Heaven Chasing Lord, 185,006,000 faction points. Third place, Human, Lord of the Blazing Sun, 150 million faction points. Fourth place, Chaos God's Race, Great One Lord, 120 million faction points. Fifth place, Myriad Spirit Clan, Spiritual Venerable Lord, 81,004,500 faction points. Zhou Zhou looked at the rankings and nodded in satisfaction. He had finally entered the top 3. However, when he saw the faction points of the other lords, he could not help but raise his eyebrows slightly. These guys' faction points are increasing very quickly, especially the True Lord. His faction points have exceeded 300 million. Zhou Zhou clicked his tongue. These top-notch lords were indeed difficult to deal with. He casually opened the World Channel and found that a few lords of Cerulean Planet had already discovered the change in his ranking and were publicizing it in the World Channel. With his current identity, status, and reputation, it wouldn't be long before all the lords on Cerulean Planet knew that he had once again become one of the top 3 lords in the event. Those rumors that said he couldn't make it would naturally not be very convincing. It only took Zhou Zhou 5 to 6 breaths to check this information. After he came back to his senses, he thanked Lu Zhen and Yu Ling. This is what you deserve. Yu Ling looked at Zhou Zhou with a strange glint in her eyes. No matter how one looked at it, the current Zhou Zhou could be considered a benefactor of the Night Empire. Therefore, he had already silently occupied a very high position in Yu Ling's heart. Stop flirting in front of me, you two. At this moment, the two of them heard Lu Zhen laugh. Yu Ling was stunned. Then, her fair face suddenly turned red. Your Majesty, what are you saying? Yu Ling wished she could stuff her head into the crack in the ground. However, there was a feeling in her heart that made her blush shyly. Your Majesty, I already have a wife. Zhou Zhou smiled bitterly. It's normal for a man to have multiple wives, especially a lord like you. Even though you're only a lord of a kingdom now, you might become an emperor of the empire in the future and even have higher power. At that time, if you only have one woman in your life, will you be able to do it? Lu Zhan shook his head. Even though he was a person who focused on the Tao, there were more than 1,000 concubines in the imperial palace, so he did not agree with Zhou Zhou. Zhou Zhou did not say anything. All right, let's not talk about this anymore. Lu Zhan didn't think of changing Zhou Zhou's mindset in a short period of time. He stood up and walked in a certain direction while talking about something else. Come on. I'll bring you to the Death Sword Demonic Abyss and let you choose a good sword. With your attainments in the Sword Tao and your aptitude in the Sword Tao. TSK Tisk. I wonder which powerful sword cultivator's death sword will choose you. But don't worry, it will definitely not be bad. Niece, come over too. Even though you've already been here before, just treat it as an old haunt. Zhou Zhou and Yu Ling immediately followed. Death Sword Demonic Abyss? What kind of place is that? Zhou Zhou asked curiously. Niece, tell him. Lu Zhan said casually. He couldn't be bothered to explain such a trivial matter himself. Yes, Your Majesty. Yu Ling nodded and looked at Zhou Zhou. When she saw Zhou Zhou's clear and curious gaze, she could not help but look to the side, not daring to meet his eyes. She said slowly, the Death Sword Demonic Abyss is a special abyss that can accommodate and nurture sword intent. It's both the divine land of the Divine Sword Empire and the divine land of our human race. Its status is comparable to the heroic spirit hall of our human race. It's said that every sword cultivator will infuse their lifelong comprehension of the Sword Tao and their ultimate techniques into their intrinsic divine swords. Then, before they die, they will throw their intrinsic divine swords into the Death Sword Demonic Abyss. After the sword master dies, these intrinsic divine swords will also lose their consciousness and become death swords in a sense. It's not until an inheritor suitable for the records in the divine swords appears that these death swords will be awakened again and carry out the master selection test. The test of choosing a master is very dangerous. You have to compete with the sword devil produced by the divine sword. Only by defeating the sword devil and winning can you inherit Senior's natal divine sword. That's how the Death Sword Demonic Abyss got its name. Tens of thousands of years have passed. To this day, there are probably more than 1 million death swords in the Death Sword Demonic Abyss. Among these death swords, their previous owners were at least legendary tier sword cultivators. The highest was even a high-tier deity-level divine artifact left behind by a high-tier deity-level sword cultivator. While there aren't many, however, it also made this place a holy land of the Sword Tao that countless sword cultivators and even god spirits yearn for. Yu Ling said. Zhou Zhou nodded. A moment later, after experiencing 3 twists and turns and the transfer of 2 spatial teleportation arrays, they arrived at the Death Sword Demonic Abyss. Zhou Zhou looked at the Death Sword Demonic Abyss in front of him in surprise. A huge, deep canyon that stretched for tens of thousands of kilometers stretched across the ground. Wisps of purple demonic energy seeped out, dyeing the entire sky like the demon realm. The space around the canyon rippled continuously, as if it wanted to isolate the Death Sword Demonic Abyss from the outside world. Lu Zhan saw Zhou Zhou's expression. He smiled. The Death Sword Demonic Abyss has buried too many death swords and the will of too many sword cultivators. Over the years, the resistance of the sword cultivators in these death swords has long become demonic and has become the obsession of metamorphosis. They have also taken control of the death sword that contains them. If you want to retrieve the sword, you have to enter the Death Sword Demonic Abyss and personally come into contact with the endless Death Sword resistance. As long as you defeat the resistance of the Death Sword that is interested in you, that Death Sword will become a living sword again and belong to you. The Sword Master inheritance inside will also belong to you. Our Divine Sword Empire and even the entire human race have so many sword cultivators. Moreover, the inheritance of sword cultivators has never stopped. Countless sword Tao geniuses can also rise in every era. This Death Sword Demonic Abyss can be said to have taken most of the credit. This is the meaning of the Divine Land, Lu Zhan said in a low voice. Zhou Zhou was even more surprised. He did not expect the Death Sword demonic abyss to be so meaningful to the Divine Sword Empire and even the human race. Still, Zhou Zhou fell into deep thought. If the benefits of the Death Sword demonic abyss were only to obtain a good sword and a superb sword Dao inheritance, then was it useful to him? In terms of swords, he had the true god-tier divine artifacts, Sword of New Dimension Creation. In terms of sword Dao inheritance, he had Grasp Qi Xuantian's sword Dao realm. It was even enough to make Lu Zhen praise him. Zhou Zhou boldly asked, "Are there true god-tier divine artifacts in the Death Sword demonic abyss?" As soon as these words were spoken, Lu Zhen and Yu Ling were stunned. How can there be a true god-tier divine artifact? Our human race only has one true god-tier divine artifact. Currently, it's in the hands of the Emperor. The other human god spirits, even my ancestor, the Sword Emperor Fuyo, only have a top-notch high-tier deity-level divine artifact, the pure Yang Dao sword. Lu Zhen shook his head. Zhou Zhou blinked. There was only one true god-tier divine artifacts in the entire human race? He smacked his lips and did not mention that he had a second true god-tier divine artifacts. This moment, Lu Zhen looked at Zhou Zhou. He seemed to have thought of something and could not help but laugh. Go on. Even though your attainments in the Sword Dao are astonishing, there are still a few Sword Dao inheritances stronger than yours in the Death Sword demonic abyss. Don't underestimate the sword cultivators of our human race since ancient times. Zhou Zhou was stunned. Then, he pursed his lips and did not say anything. This big shot seemed to have misunderstood me. I'm not that arrogant. However, he did not explain anything. He could not say that he was thinking about having a second true god-tier divine artifacts. Without another word, he flew up and quickly flew above the Death Sword demonic abyss. He looked at the scene below, which was filled with purple energy, like the Demon Realm district. Zhou Zhou took a deep breath and put on a divine artifact. Then, he summoned his 14 final guard members and asked them to surround him to protect him. Then, he took out the pillar of the Empire puppet that had 9 summonings left and held it in his hand, making it easier to summon it at any time. Finally, he took out a series of life-saving methods, such as the Death Substitution Puppet, Random Teleportation Talisman, Ethereal Scroll, and other items. He used them all on himself. It would be best if after all this. Only then did he feel a little safe and fly straight down. Lu Zhen and Yu Ling, who had witnessed all this, were speechless. Lu Zhen, this kid is quite steady. I originally wanted to tell him that I would always be watching him from above and not let him be in danger. From the looks of it, there's no need. Yu Ling also clicked her tongue and nodded. Being steady was a good trait after all. Under the Death Sword demonic abyss, Zhou Zhou was wrapped in wisps of fine sword energy. He fell into the depths of the Death Sword demonic abyss like a meteor. His arrival was like a drop of water falling into a pot of hot oil. Rumble. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The Death Sword demonic abyss was trembling. Countless low, irritable, suppressed, or sharp sword hums sounded. It was as if a large number of undead had been awakened under the ground. My good lord. All the death swords in the Death Sword demonic abyss were activated? Lu Zhen clicked his tongue in wonder with a surprised smile on his face. Yu Ling's eyes widened. Back then, when she entered the Death Sword demonic abyss, she had only triggered more than 10,000 death swords to respond to her. But that was it. It also made Lu Zhen sincerely praise her for being a good seedling to cultivate the Sword Dao. If she embarked on the path of a sword immortal, her future would definitely be limitless. After so many years, she had indeed felt her talent in the Sword Dao. Not to mention anything else, she was now at the epic tier. However, she could fight even legendary tier fog monsters. This was the powerful strength she had obtained after becoming a sword cultivator. Therefore, she had long realized the value of the 10,000-odd death swords. The combined cry of more than 10,000 divine swords allowed her to have her current achievements. More than 1,000,000 divine swords in the entire Death Sword demonic abyss sounded for Zhou Zhou. What kind of sword Dao aptitude was this? Yu Ling did not dare to imagine it. In the Death Sword demonic abyss, Zhou Zhou looked at least hundreds of illusory figures made of purple demonic energy charging at him with all kinds of divine swords in their hands. In the end, they were shattered by the sword chi wrapped around him before they could get close. However, there were still waves of death sword resistance. They attacked Zhou Zhou in an endless stream, and batch after batch of them died. Zhou Zhou watched this scene calmly. The sword Dao cultivation of this group of death sword resistance had not even surpassed Qi Xintian, so they were naturally not valued by him. He could only choose to bring a sword out when he came to the death sword demonic abyss. He could not attack casually. He narrowed his eyes and suddenly accelerated. After flying for about 300,000 meters, Zhou Zhou arrived at the bottom of the canyon. He looked at the illusion here. This place seemed to be a dead place and was very quiet. What greeted his eyes was grayish-white lifeless soil and the lifeless swords inserted in the soil. Zhou Zhou casually picked up a rusty sword. The hilt of this sword was still wrapped in black, dilapidated tassel. It looked very old, like a broken sword that had been abandoned here. Zhou Zhou looked at it and was stunned to discover that it was a legendary tier sword. He looked at the other broken swords. In the end, he realized that every lousy sword in his sight was a legendary tier elementary grade sword at the very least. The highest was a legendary tier advanced grade sword. Zhou Zhou had yet to see any higher level swords. This death sword demonic abyss is at least tens of millions of square kilometers in size. Where should I go? Zhou Zhou pondered. Just as he was thinking, a faint feeling suddenly appeared in his mind, guiding him towards the southwest, as if there was a treasure he needed the most in that direction. Is my Lord Talent intuition working? Zhou Zhou was stunned. Then, he was overjoyed. He had almost forgotten that he had this Lord Talent. Then, Zhou Zhou flew quickly in the direction indicated by his talent intuition without hesitation. Along the way, Zhou Zhou also quickly sensed the death sword he encountered along the way. Then, he discovered these swords. The lowest was at the legendary tier elementary grade. He even saw a mid-tier deity-level elementary grade divine sword. However, he ignored all of this. He chose to believe in his talent intuition that it would bring him the best choices and results. On the death sword demonic abyss, Lu Zhan and Yu Ling looked into the depths of the canyon covered in purple demonic energy. They both frowned. Even though both of them were extraordinary tier and one of them was a high-tier deity-level god spirit, he could not see the situation more than 300,000 meters below. Your Majesty, what kind of sword do you think Zhou Zhou can obtain? Yu Ling could not help but ask. With this king of the Blazing Sun's unprecedented sword Dao aptitude, he can probably subdue more than 99% of the sword artifacts under the death sword demonic abyss at will. However, I can tell that he has extremely high standards. Ordinary sword artifacts shouldn't catch his eye. He will probably choose at least one divine artifact level sword. However, the death sword demonic abyss is too vast. There's also demonic energy, sword energy, obsessions, and other things that obstruct the spread of divine sense. It also greatly reduces the efficiency of finding a good sword. There's also demonic energy, sword energy, obsessions, and other things that obstruct the spread of divine sense. It also greatly reduces the efficiency of finding a good sword. Whether he can obtain a good sword that satisfies him will depend on this king of the Blazing Sun's choice. Lu Zhan pondered. Yu Ling frowned slightly and nodded. Under the death sword demonic abyss, Zhou Zhou looked at the sword in front of him. One side of the sword artifact was engraved with the scene of mountains, rivers, plants, and trees. A faint vitality spread from its surface. There was nothing on the other side. Could it be? Zhou Zhou's eyes were filled with surprise and even widened in excitement. He looked at the sword. Soon, a text notification appeared. Race Divine Artifact Name. Incomplete Sword of Xian Yuan. Equipment Grade. Unique in the race. As a Chinese, Race Divine Artifact Ability 1. Sun Moon Star Sword. Unknown, you need to collect and fuse the sun, moon, star faces of the Sword of Xian Yuan to activate this Race Divine Artifact ability. Race Divine Artifact Ability 2. mountain river plants, and tree sword. All plants planted by the humans of the cerulean planet will be loved by the mountains and rivers. Their growth time will decrease by 20%. The maximum reduction time is not more than 99.9%. The sword-holding lord and its cerulean planet subjects would be even more favored by the mountain river plants and tree sword. The growth time of plants and trees would decrease by 30%. The maximum reduction time would not exceed 99.9%. Moreover, when plants matured, there was a 20% chance that the medicinal effect would increase by 50%. There was a 1% chance that the quality of plants and trees would increase by 1. And there was a 0.01% chance that the quality of plants and trees would increase by 2. Race Divine Artifact Ability 3, Agriculture Husbandry Sword. Unknown. To activate this race's divine artifact ability, you need to collect and fuse with the Sword of Xian Yuan's Agriculture Husbandry Sword face. Race Divine Artifact Ability 4, Heaven and Earth Unification Sword. Unknown. To activate this race's divine artifact ability, you need to collect and fuse the hilt of the Sword of Xian Yuan's Heaven and Earth Unification. Introduction to the Race Divine Artifact, Sword of Xian Yuan, also known as the Xian Yuan Xiaoyu Sword. One side of the sword is engraved with the sun, moon, and stars, while the other side is carved with mountains, rivers, plants, and trees. The hilt is filled with the art of agriculture husbandry sword, and the other side contains the strategy of unifying the world. It contains endless power. It does not only kill demons, it is also one of the important reliances of the cerulean planet lord in fighting for the position of lord of all races on the high continent. It's indeed the incomplete sword of Xian Yuan, Zhou Zhou said excitedly. He had never expected this. His third incomplete sword of Xian Yuan was actually obtained in the Death Sword Demonic Abyss. Compared to it, low-tier deity-level divine artifacts, high-tier deity-level divine artifacts, and even true god-tier divine artifacts were no longer important. How could a divine artifact be more precious than a race divine artifact? Not to mention this racial divine artifact of the human race on the cerulean planet. Moreover, the effect of this sword of Xian Yuan, the mountain river plants and tree sword, was ridiculously strong. Just a 20% reduction in growth time was a top-grade support effect. As for the 20% chance, it was not bad to increase the medicinal effect by 50% when plants matured. As for the last 1% probability, grass and plant quality plus 1. 0.01% probability, grass and plant quality plus 2. The effect was even more heaven-defying. An ordinary epic tier medicinal herb, with the help of the mountain river plants and tree sword, its quality might directly increase by 2 levels and become a low-tier god-tier medicinal herb. Even though their chances of success sounded very low, one had to know that they were all large patches of seeds. Therefore, as long as there were enough of them, no matter how small the probability was, growing them was possible. It was just a matter of time. Moreover, there would not be a loss as long as the medicinal herbs were planted. He did not have to worry about the losses from planting medicinal herbs in large quantities. And the most important thing was, Linger's divine herb garden can almost be said to have gained wings with the enhancement of the mountain river plants and tree sword. Zhou Zhou thought excitedly. With the effect of this mountain river plants and tree sword, when Linger used the divine herb garden to grow medicinal herbs in the future, as long as they were medicinal herbs below the yellow gold tier, they could be reduced by 99.9%. Even legendary tier medicinal herbs could reduce growth time by 49.9%. Other than the fact that it could not work on god tier medicinal herbs, it was almost not much different from the mythical tier unique lord talent. Currently, other than a portion of the medicinal herbs bought from the outside world, most of the remaining medicinal herbs were provided by Linger. It was naturally extremely beneficial to him that Linger's lord talent had been indirectly enhanced. He came back to his senses after a long time. Then, he suddenly remembered something. He picked up the sword of Xian Yuan, Sun Moon Plant Sword. After sensing it, he did not feel any obsession from it. Which meant, this sword of Xian Yuan, the Sun Moon Plant Sword, did not have a previous owner. Zhou Zhou could not help but think. The first 2 incomplete pieces of the sword of Xian Yuan were obtained from the reward of the Supreme Will. The third one was incomplete, but it was obtained from this death sword demonic abyss. And there's no sword master. In other words, it's very likely to have suddenly appeared here. This is very likely the work of the Supreme Will. And if it's really what the Supreme Will did, that also means that the last part of my sword of Xin Yuan, the Heaven and Earth Unification Sword, is very likely to have already appeared in a certain place in the High Continent. Or it might be in an alternate world outside a High Continent. Thinking of this, Zhou Zhou could not help but fall into deep thought. It seemed that he had to pay attention to inquiring about this when he conquered the foreign land in the future. Then, he fused the sword of Xin Yuan, the mountain river plants and tree sword, with his own sword of Xin Yuan, becoming an incomplete sword of Xin Yuan that was only missing a portion of the hilt. Zhou Zhou looked at the abilities of the three-race divine artifacts on it and could not help but click his tongue. This sword of Xin Yuan could completely increase the future potential of the entire cerulean planet by several levels alone. The sword of Xin Yuan could definitely be considered a top-notch divine artifact of the race, even among the many divine artifacts of the race. Zhou Zhou did not think too much about it. He put away the sword of Xin Yuan and turned into a golden stream of light, flying towards the top of the death sword demonic abyss. He had already obtained the sword, so it was time to leave. On the death sword demonic abyss, Lu Zhan and Yuling waited quietly for Zhou Zhou to come out. The death sword demonic abyss could allow those who entered to stay inside for at most 3 days and 3 nights. After 3 days and 3 nights, if the person who entered had yet to decide which death sword to choose, then the million death swords in the death sword demonic abyss would feel that the other party was looking down on them. When the time comes, all the death swords would join forces and expel the person who entered from the death sword demonic abyss, preventing them from coming in again. From then on, they would forever lose the chance to obtain the death sword's inheritance in the death sword demonic abyss. On the way here, Lu Zhan had already told Zhou Zhou about this. Therefore, the two of them were preparing to wait here for 3 days and 3 nights. They would also secretly protect Zhou Zhou to prevent him from encountering any undefeatable danger. Niece. Nephew will probably stay for 3 days and 3 nights. How about you and I play Lord Chess? Lu Zhan waved his right hand, and a table appeared out of thin air on the ground. There were 2 chairs and a chessboard and chess piece made of white jade crystal on the table. Lord Chess was a game of chess that had been circulating in the High Continent for a long time. From the commoners to the nobles, no matter which class it was, they were willing to play a few rounds of Lord Chess in their spare time. Not only could they pass the time, but they could also pass the addiction of roaming the High Continent and fighting for the position of the Supreme Lord. Yuling nodded distractedly when she heard this. The corners of Chu Zhou's mouth curled up seeing that. He could clearly tell that this little girl already had feelings for the king of the blazing sun. However, he naturally had no intention of objecting. Instead, he agreed greatly and even wanted to personally matchmake them. As a grand unity golden immortal realm, high-tier deity level, who had lived for an unknown period of time, the thing he loved to see the most in his life, other than the scene of the human race growing stronger day by day, was that a lover was finally married. A moment later, just as the two of them were about to play chess, buzz! Countless low sword hums sounded from the deepest part of the death sword demonic abyss. Lu Zhan and Yuling were stunned. Then, the two of them stood up almost at the same time. This is a farewell sword chant? My nephew is coming out? Lu Zhan was stunned. Yuling was also very surprised. How could it be so fast? They saw a golden figure shoot out from the depths of the canyon and fly in front of them, revealing Zhou Zhou before the two of them could react. Nephew, why are you so fast? Lu Zhan could not help but ask. Zhou Zhou was originally quite happy, but after hearing this, the corners of his mouth twitched a few times. I'm not fast, Zhou Zhou added. I naturally emerged after finding a sword that suits me. Zhou Zhou knew that he could stay for 3 days and 3 nights. However, he really felt that there was no need to waste time. He had already obtained a supreme treasure like a race divine artifact. What should he still be doing down there? A sightseeing tour? Lu Zhan and Yuling nodded after a few seconds. What level of sword did you obtain? Lu Zhen asked curiously. When Zhou Zhou heard this, he didn't waste any time and directly shared the information about the divine artifact of the Sword of Xian Yuan, mountain river plants, and tree sword with the two of them. As for his main body that had already fused into the Sword of Xian Yuan, he definitely could not take it out. When the two of them saw the information of this race divine artifact, they were first stunned, then stunned. Race divine artifact? Lu Zhen stammered. Race divine artifact? He reacted and was immediately shocked. How can there be a race divine artifact? Impossible. When did such a divine artifact appear in the Death Sword demonic abyss? Lu Zhen was stunned. Yu Ling was even more confused. It's our cerulean planet's human race's divine artifact. I reckon that after the humans of the cerulean planet came to the Supreme Continent, the Supreme will casually through the race divine artifacts of the humans of the cerulean planet here. Our cerulean planet's human race's divine artifacts are like this, and the divine artifacts of the lords of the other races are probably no exception. They should have also spread to a certain corner of the entire high continent and even the endless heavens. Zhou Zhou said. Lu Zhen was stunned. Then, he hurriedly looked at the information on the divine artifact of the mountain river plants and tree sword. As expected, he saw that it was a divine artifact exclusive to the humans of the cerulean planet. So it can only be used by the humans on the cerulean planet? I thought it would be useful to the entire human race. Lu Zhen smacked his lips twice, feeling that it was a pity. At the same time, he had also guessed why the other party had been able to find a race divine artifact so quickly. It's probably because the humans of the cerulean planet could sense the divine artifacts of their race, right? Lu Zhen thought. Zhou Zhou smiled. If this Sword of Xian Yuan, the mountain river plants and tree sword, could be useful to the entire human race, then even if their human race could not compare to top-notch bloodline races like the original spirit race in terms of talent, they were comparable to some races that could reach the elven and demon levels. I was wondering why nephew emerged so quickly. That's true. In front of a race divine artifact, let alone a divine artifact, even if it's a true god-tier divine artifact, you have to consider it. Lu Zhen paused at the end. The three of them looked at each other and could not help but smile. Oh yes. Now that the diplomacy between your blazing Sun Kingdom and my Divine Sword Empire has reached the level of respect, why don't you join our Holy Sword Empire's Empire faction? Then, I will give you the strongest faction quest of the Divine Sword Empire. It's naturally best if it's completed. If you can't complete it, I won't set any punishment for you for failing the faction mission. How about that? Lu Zhen asked. Thank you, Your Majesty. I can't ask for more. Without any hesitation, Zhou Zhou immediately agreed. If it was a kingdom-level lord faction that issued him a top-notch faction quest, he might reject their faction quest in order to avoid running out of time. However, the Empire faction quests were different. The rewards for the Empire faction quests were extremely generous, even 10 times or more than the rewards for the kingdom-level faction quests. Which meant, completing an Empire-level faction quest was equivalent to completing 10 kingdom-level faction quests. He was naturally willing to accept such a thing that saved time and gave him an extremely high reward. Then, he did not waste any time and directly opened the activity icon of the King of 10,000 Kings. Then, he opened the Join the Faction option and found the Human Race, Divine Sword Empire, Friendly option. Then, he chose to join the faction. Almost in the next second, he realized that he had successfully joined the Empire's camp of the Holy Sword Empire. There was no doubt, this was definitely the work of His Majesty Lu Zhen. Lu Zhen looked at Zhou Zhou with a much friendlier gaze. Then, he said, if that's the case, then I'll hand this top-notch faction quest to you. Whether you can complete it or not depends on you. Lu Zhen patted Zhou Zhou's shoulder. The next second, a text notification appeared. Divine Sword Empire Faction. Lord of the Empire, Lu Zhen issued you a faction quest. Faction quest name, Save the Divine Sword Empire. Quest quality, Legendary tier advanced grade, unique. Quest content, Remove the current crisis of the Divine Sword Empire being surrounded by the Fog Monster Army from all sides and help the Divine Sword Empire recover to the peace before the calamity of the myriad races. Mission reward, 400 million faction points. The loyalty of 10,000 Chi practitioners, epic tier, 100 legendary tier mist cores, and a random special building blueprint for the cultivation path of Chi practitioners. Zhou Zhou's eyes lit up. Even though the rewards of this faction quest were not as rich as before, his faction points had reached a total of 400 million faction points. Zhou Zhou actually did not lack any fancy rewards now. What he lacked were faction points that could help him increase his ranking. While this faction quest seemed a little difficult to complete, as long as the number of soldiers increased by a few times every day, in less than 10 days, he was confident that he had enough troops to sweep through all the fog monsters in the Divine Sword Empire. At the thought of this, Zhou Zhou chose to accept this faction quest without hesitation. You brat, you are so bold. As expected of you, who can obtain the strongest lord of all races. He's actually so bold when accepting such a difficult faction quest. Lu Zhen watched as Zhou Zhou accepted the faction quest without hesitation. He looked at him with even more admiration. Let's go. I'll bring you guys out for a meal. At the same time, I'll let my royal descendants take a good look at what their role models are like. At the very least, they have to learn from your boldness. Lu Zhen laughed. Zhou Zhou and Yu Ling did not refuse. Anyway, it was just a meal. Then, Lu Zhen brought Zhou Zhou, Yu Ling, to eat a royal banquet with 70 to 80 direct descendants of the Divine Sword Empire. At this banquet, Zhou Zhou or Yu Ling ate quite happily. Furthermore, the descendants of the royal family did not look down on others like in the novels. Instead, they were all polite and had extremely good attitudes. They even took the initiative to befriend them, making Zhou Zhou praise the other party's royal family's education. As a chaos human with extremely sharp senses, he could sense that these imperial family descendants were not pretending in front of him. Instead, they were sincere and friendly from the bottom of their hearts. This was very rare. In the end, this banquet could be considered to be a joyous occasion for the host and guests. After the banquet ended, Zhou Zhou brought up the matter of finding trouble with the Scarlet faction that had besieged the Divine Sword Empire. Lu Zhen called a man over. His name is Ruoji, and he's the strategist of the first pure young army under me. He's also a legendary tier elementary grade warlock. He's currently presiding over the Divine Sword Empire's intelligence collection of the surrounding fog monster army. If you have any questions in this regard, just ask him directly. Even if it's a relatively confidential intelligence question, he can answer it. Lu Zhen said, "Greetings, Lord Ruoji." Zhou Zhou nodded at him. He looked at him. Ruoji was a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 30s or 40s, but he did not know how old he was. He was wearing a reddish-brown strategist's outfit. He was thin and had a gentle face. His eyes seemed to be able to see through all the schemes and strange things. He could grasp everything and gave off a very reliable feeling. King of the Blazing Sun, you're too kind. Ruoji smiled politely. This King of the Blazing Sun's reputation was like a newborn son. It had already shocked the entire human race. Who in the entire human race, or even countless foreign races, didn't know of him? In fact, many higher-ups of the human race thought highly of him. They even called him one of the future hopes of the human race. Even though he, Ruoji, was trusted by His Majesty, he did not dare to neglect such a human prodigy. I heard from His Majesty that you want to cause trouble for the Scarlet Fog army that besieged our Divine Sword Empire? What's the target? Ruoji asked kindly. Naturally, it's a place with many scarlet monsters attacking our city. The more the merrier. Zhou Zhou emphasized again. As soon as these words were spoken, be it Lu Zhen, Yu Ling, or Ruoji, they all looked at him in surprise. Could it be that this kid was deliberately showing off in front of His Majesty? Ruoji guessed. Okay. He didn't think much of it and nodded with a smile. After that, the two of them did not say anything else. After bidding farewell to Lu Zhen, they turned around and walked towards the exit of the Imperial Palace. As you've requested, The most heavily besieged place in the Kingdom of Sword is undoubtedly the Divine Craftsman City. The Divine Craftsman City is a city of craftsmen in the Holy Sword Empire that is specially used to forge weapons and armor. Nearly 50% of the craftsmen of our Divine Sword Empire are gathered inside. These blacksmiths are extremely good at forging armor and ordinary standard weapons, especially in forging flying swords. They even have the reputation of flying sword capital in our Divine Sword Empire. The Divine Craftsman City is located at the northwest border of the Holy Sword Empire. To allow the Divine Craftsman City to continuously produce weapons, armor, and even flying swords, His Majesty invests a lot of resources in it every year, especially rare ores and resources. More than 70% of the rare ores and resources that our Divine Sword Empire harvests every year will be invested in the Divine Craftsman City. Because of this, the Divine Craftsman City has gathered a large portion of our precious resources and a large number of craftsmen. Because of these 2 points, the Fog Monster Army has targeted the Divine Craftsman City. If they can capture the Divine Craftsman City, obtain the national ores resources in the city, and transform all the craftsmen into fog monsters or kill them, the strength of these fog monsters will immediately be clearly enhanced, and our Divine Sword Empire will be clearly severely injured. Ruoji said solemnly. Even though we want to send more troops to the Divine Craftsman City, the various places in the Divine Sword Empire are already in a hurry. All the troops have long been sent out. There's no way to squeeze out additional troops to support the Divine Craftsman City. If King of the Blazing Sun can alleviate the pressure of war in the Divine Craftsman City, everyone in the Divine Sword Empire will be indebted to you. As soon as he finished speaking, a text notification appeared. Divine Sword Empire Faction. Lord of the Empire, Lu Zhan issued you a faction quest. Faction quest name: Rescue. Quest grade: Epic Tier Advanced Grade. Quest content: as a light industrial city with a large number of craftsmen and a vast amount of rare mineral resources, Divine Craftsman City is very important in the eyes of the Divine Sword Empire, but it is also very important in the eyes of the fog monsters. Please go to the Divine Craftsman City and use all your means to ease the pressure of war in the Divine Craftsman City. Mission reward: 10 million faction points, 1,000 extraordinary tier blacksmith, carpenter/tailor's allegiance, 1,000 epic tier mist cores. When Zhou Zhou saw this, he did not hesitate and took it. In any case, it was just one insight defection. It would be a waste not to do it. Don't worry, my lord. I'm not confident in saving the entire Divine Craftsman City since my soldiers are not by my side now. However, if it's just to ease the pressure of war in the Divine Craftsman City, I can do it alone. Zhou Zhou smiled. Oh. Ruoji looked at him in surprise, then nodded. Come with me. Okay.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe.